man whose wife was run over and killed by an 85-year-old man is campaigning for compulsory retesting every 3 years once a driver reaches 70. The man was driving 57 miles per hour in a 20-mile-per-hour zone and had confused his accelerator for the brakes. So should older drivers, Penny, be retested?
I believe, as one continues through life, I think we should be retested on many things, and particularly those that are responsible for other passengers, like bus drivers and drivers that have kids on board, etc. But as far as old people, then of course, we all know naturally age has effect on our eyesight, on our reaction time. I mean, my grandmother actually didn't take her first driving lessons and pass her test until she was in her late 60s. She wanted a bit of independence.
But then and did she pass?
She did pass, and she
then would it be fair to take that away from her?
For quite a few years. But then she suffered from dementia, and her eyesight was becoming poor. She couldn't remember things, her reaction time. So eventually she was advised, only through family though, that she should probably stop driving. Whereas I think if a doctor had given her advice, or there was a law about retaking, not necessarily retaking a test because she understood the laws, but just like a simulator that could test your reaction, or an eyesight test for long distance. I know my father, you know, he probably needs to go back and get his eyes tested because, you end up sort of squinting and not being able to see, the small things, like someone stepping out on off the curb, or even an animal at night, night vision. So I think
hearing as well, the hearing tests that should be done. Also, I always think, and I think it doesn't necessarily mean age, people don't know the highway code anymore. Just, if you go around a roundabout, people should let people from the right go. You often get people who don't really know that anymore. So maybe that should be a test.
I don't think that's knowing the highway code. I think that's manners more than anything else.
But also you should know the highway code.
Well,
the highway code changes a lot.
Sorry, Colleen, I would like to be tested on the highway code right now. I'm sure most of us will fail. And as someone who's going to be 70 next year, pause for violins, I don't want to take my driving test again. I think this is incredibly ageist. I mean, most of the accidents, 34% of all the accidents, are caused by people aged approximately 18 to 24. And older drivers over 70 only account for 4% of accidents. So, without going into facts and figures, it does seem stacked, Yeah,
but do you think it's because the older ones that do have the accidents, it's usually because their reactions have been too slow, or they've confused the accelerator for the brake? It's normally caused by that, which makes you think they need to...
I had a great deal of trouble passing my driving test. I wrote off the car on the way to one test, which was a bit of a comedy moment, but perhaps not for my ex-husband, whose car I borrowed. But I agree that testing people for their reaction time and for their vision and for their hearing would be really good.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, but you're aiming at old people. I don't want to take the test all over again. And I know that at the moment, when you get to 70, there's a self-assessment thing where you fill in a declaration that you're fit to drive.
Yeah, but that's filling in a declaration. Yeah, that's not having a test.
Apparently, the government wants to raise that to 80. They're thinking about it, the Department of Transport, because it has saved them a lot of money in processing or whatever. But I do think that maybe from the age of 60, it would be good to be medically, do these reaction tests Penny's talking about every 5 years. But we're reaching a stage where a quarter of the population by 2023 or something like that is going to be over 60. So we're talking about a huge number of people, but people in their 20s and 30s can be on drugs. They can have had strokes.
You could say that.
They can be completely unfit to drive. I'm just pleading. I don't want to see pensioners demonised, that's all.
We're not demonising, and it's not ageist. It just means that you have to be fit and healthy to drive a car. That's the end of the story. I was in a car with my mother. I was talking to her and she fell asleep at the wheel as she was driving. Now, that's because of
Can't blame her, really, with Sherry talking.
Well, then, so from that moment on, I said, you mustn't drive. She still drove. She didn't believe she got anything wrong with her sight. She didn't believe she got anything wrong with her hearing or her reactions. She had, and she could have killed somebody. And more importantly, she could have killed
that's the
herself.
point. I think a lot of older people don't want to admit that they're getting old, you know, and so it does end up coming down to...
Don't want to admit I'm getting old.
No, none of us want
I'm not getting old.
When it's not getting old, it's not a matter of getting old.
But your general public, I think, I know from my experience, my grandparents, you know, they refused to kind of put themselves in the category of old people, except they were going through the symptoms of age, and it had to be the family that would very subtly have to advise them, you know, you shouldn't do this anymore because you've had that fall last week, and you know, and it's sad to have to admit that, but I think it's
But what about
the
the
safety
people
of the older people and also the public?
But there's a lot.
I come back to
That's what I was gonna say.
old
There's
people
probably-
don't cause deaths.
No.
Yeah, but-
They cause very few deaths, and the ones like there was
But
one
there's
last
probably
week, a
more
bus
younger,
driver
but
that
what
caused a
I
death,
think
a
the statistics
77-year-old.
are there because there's probably more young people driving than there are older people. That's why it's that way.
Right.
And the thing is, Janet, we can't do anything about the young people. That's the law. They're allowed to drive.
Yeah, but they cause 34%.
But they have
That's
their
a third of all
I
the
know, so
accidents.
they have their tests. They've
maybe
already
all
had their
ages,
tests.
maybe all ages should have tests.